Welcome to the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin's What is Spirituality podcast. Your host, Steve Spilde, is the Associate Director at the Center. His guests talk about their evolving understanding of God, prayer, healing, and wholeness. The next two podcasts from Franciscan Spirituality Center will feature conversation on SDPP. Steve, a lot of people don't know what SDPP is. What is it?
SDPP is the Spiritual Direction Preparation Program. It's a 3-year program where people train to become what's known as spiritual directors or spiritual companions. Primarily, it's an opportunity for people to become better listeners. And in order to do that, people need to examine what it is that blocks them from being good listeners. And so they create an open space within their hearts so they can hear the stories of other people. I'm excited to welcome someone I consider a dear friend, Kristy Walz. So first question, who is Kristy Walz?
That's a really interesting question. Why do you ask? That's an ever-evolving response, yeah? I think it depends on the day. It depends on the circumstances. I could give you that cliche, like I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. I don't know that I have an answer to that today. It's just sometimes life puts you in these stages of transformation and evolution. I would say that I am going through one of those right now. And so to have an answer to that is difficult. I'm married. I've been with my husband for 20 years. We celebrated 18 years of marriage in February. We have a 15-year-old daughter who is the most wonderful human being I know. Also often at this stage, sometimes the most challenging human being I know. We have a pet therapy dog, Walter, who's a Catahoula Leopard. People usually say, what? He was a rescue from down south, and he is this calm, delightful presence when I have spiritual direction folks that come to my office to meet with me. He will oftentimes lay right at their feet. And so we love his energy around this house.
When you came to this program, how would you have described your religious tradition?
None. None, none. I did not grow up churched. My experiences of the divine came through nature, primarily nature. Nature, other people, art, music, sensing the energies around me, always feeling like I was held, even though I don't know that I really knew what that meant. I always felt a part of something outside of myself, bigger than me, and sensed the connection between human beings. And so I think my religious tradition was very experiential.
What does spiritual direction mean to you?
It's a lifeline. It's a gift. It's a blessing. To be in the directee chair is this revealing, loving path toward wholeness that I have not experienced in any other situation. And to be in the director chair is very much the same experience. To be walking with people and have the gift of hearing their stories is truly a blessing.
Do you meet with people for formal spiritual direction, Kristy?
So the answer to that, Steve, really has two parts. So I meet with people for formal spiritual direction that are coming, that are choosing to invest their own resources in coming to spiritual direction. And I also, primarily, the way that I practice is I practice in a corporate setting. And what I will say when I start a new relationship with someone in a corporate setting is I'm not an executive coach. My friends that are executive coaches say that some of the work that we do is similar, but my training is as a spiritual director, which means that you can bring anything here. This isn't work related. This is whole life related. We ebb and we flow out of those two spaces, and what impacts us at work impacts us at home and vice versa. So I try to be very clear with them that you can call it whatever you need to call it for the contract or for your board. But what we're really doing here is spiritual direction.
When you came to the program, how would you have described your career to that point?
So my career to that point is very similar to my career now, but I think there's a depth after having been through the program that I did not have before. And so I have a consulting practice where I work with leaders and organizations to help them develop their leadership skills. Sometimes that's in a group setting. More often now, and especially since COVID, that's in a one-on-one setting where I'm doing that corporate spiritual direction piece. I think prior to SDPP, I was trained in asking questions and listening In fact, I can remember sitting in our first weekend of SDPP and I was thinking, oh, I could be really good at this because I know how to ask questions. But what I recognized as the time went on was that the questions that I was asking of the people that were sitting across from me were rooted in driving them to a certain point, getting them to some specific outcome. And what's different after SDPP is that I don't want to drive anybody anywhere. I just want to be by your side, like a swim coach, you know? If the backstroke isn't working, why don't you flip over and try the front stroke? And I'll walk with you and I'll tell you what I'm seeing. And you can do with that whatever you choose. But that there's not a specific outcome or objective that we're aiming for. And it's really about giving people the space to be who they are and do what they need to do.
Since completing the program, do you see your career in a new way, Kristy?
Steve, I think, it's like the funniest thing because once I finished the program, the invitations for work that started coming my way were to work with individuals that seemed to someone else in their organization like they needed a little extra support one-on-one, or to work with two people that were having a difficult time getting along with one another, or to work with teams that were labeled as dysfunctional teams. And so it was almost as if by design, once I was given the tools to participate in this ministry, that the opportunities emerged. So I don't do different work than I used to do. I think I just approach it differently because I've had the gift of 3 years of training to be a spiritual director.
How do you use the gifts you developed during SDPP?
Certainly, in a work setting, in a work environment, working with individuals and leaders in organizations. I think where it's had the most impact, though, is in my home and in my life and the way I choose to show up in my community. That 3 years was worth it right there.
As someone who came to the program who identifies as a spiritual nun, None, what would you say to other people who are hesitant to apply for SDPP because they don't feel like they're Christian enough or religious enough or Catholic enough?
Yeah, it never felt to me like, well, I can't say that. There was one time that I felt excluded, different. And that was just, and you can edit this out, Steve, if it's not. That was by one person that happened to be a part of my cohort who I think was threatened by the fact that there was someone in that cohort that didn't have a defined religious and Catholic upbringing. But I was able to learn from that and grow from that and meet her where she was. I would say I had a great supervisor who, when she recognized that I didn't have the biblical knowledge that might be helpful on one of our weekends, she would provide me with alternatives. So, for instance, the weekend with the Ignatian exercises, she handed me the new spiritual exercises of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and said, do this instead. This fits for you. And so I think there's just a tremendous amount of acceptance and permission giving to find your own way. I think one of the challenges that I thought I might have is, who's going to want to come see me for spiritual direction? Like, I didn't grow up in a church. What do I know? The Holy Spirit sends you who you need.
So, Kristy, when you became aware of SDPP, the program, and you were introduced to it, at one point, my understanding is you had an insight like, wow, I could do this.
Yeah, I think, I'm lucky enough to live in the La Crosse area. So FSC has always been kind of in my backyard, so to speak. And my first experience there was going to Grandma Pat's yoga class. One of my friends dragged me to a yoga class. It was the first time I went through the doors of the center. And the second time I was there was also by invitation. So 2 invitations, the yoga class. And then the second time was for a workshop on intuition, which was taught by Sister Jean Kasperbauer. And I can remember, because I grew up without any religious tradition, feeling really intimidated about walking into that space. I like to be early, and I couldn't find a parking space on Market Street. And so I circled the block a few times and finally found a space and ran in the door just a couple of minutes before the class began with my mug of tea and the only seat that was left. It was set up in a circle and around. The only seat that was left was next to the nun that was teaching the class. And, my stories about nuns came from my dad, who grew up in Catholic schools. And so I did not have
this
a shiny...
This is nun, N-U-N.
N-U-N, not N-O-N-E, right. I did not have a warm and fuzzy image of the sisters, which, if you know anything about FSPA, it's exactly, these are wonderful radical women. I went in and I just felt like as that day went on, I just wanted to sit closer to her and sit closer to her. And we had a really beautiful conversation over lunch. And before I left that day, I said, I would just love to spend some more time with you. Is there a way that we can do that? And she said, I'm a spiritual director. You should start coming for spiritual direction. So there's another invitation. I had no idea what spiritual direction was when she invited me to come see her for spiritual direction. And as our monthly sessions went on, I think, Steve, it was probably 6 or 8 months in, one day before I left her house, she handed me a brochure. And she said, I think that you can do this work, and I think that you should do this work. And I'd like for you to consider applying to be a part of the spiritual direction preparation program. So I walked out to my car and I opened the brochure, and there was no discernment. There's something moved inside of me. I can remember having a very positive physical response to what I was reading. And I picked up my phone and I called my husband and I said, I am on my way home and I would like to go for a walk because there's something that I'm going to need your support with over the next 3 years, and I want to talk with you about it. All by invitation.
If you have any questions about any of the programs that they offer at the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we invite you to call us at 608-791-5295. That's 608-791-5295. You can also visit our website at www.fscenter.org. www.fscenter.org. Thank you for listening.